It's the 2022 World Cup. It's France's players. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor. And today we will be looking at France's squad for the 2022 World Cup.
Examination, and so we turn our attention to a discussion of the squad, and we'll start by kind of going back to our notes that emerged out of previous podcasts, and I don't think we need to say much about the first one. Do you want to just kind of take us through the titles, Connor?
Yeah, so no outstanding leader was 1 point.
Yeah, that was a takeaway from the general history, but we won't dwell on that here.
Poor in the 2022-23 Nations League was our 2nd point.
Yeah, do you want to talk about how they performed there?
Yeah, I mean, we are aware of their September games. They ended up surviving relegation, but just barely, and that was despite a loss to Denmark in their final game. Croatia and Denmark had 13 and 12 points. France had just 5 points from their 6 games, a point ahead of Austria, who had 4. So yeah, not a very good performance from them in the Nations League, and lost that final game to Denmark with fate in their own hands, but ended up surviving nonetheless.
Yeah, they lost both games to Denmark, which is interesting because they faced Denmark in the World Cup here. Yeah. And after going through the players, we see that especially in those last 6 Nations League games, there was so much mixing and matching, a lot of it brought on by injury, but that had to contribute to their poor performance, Connor.
Yeah, for sure. Injuries and just inconsistency in the lineup. It's hard to find partnership. It's hard to establish things. And again, that's, by this time with these kind of warm-up games for the World Cup, that's what you want to be doing, finding established partnership. So a little bit disruptive, and it almost cost them dearly with relegation, but they did avoid it.
Right. I think there was one more point from the takeaways.
Yeah, they were characterized by periods of strength and weakness.
Okay, well, we talked a bit about that at the beginning. I think the main point being that there is a bit of a danger for them following a good performance. They won the World Cup in 2020. But when they did so in 1998, it was followed by a poor performance in 2002. And 2010 was a poor follow-up to a finals appearance in 2006. Do you see that happening here, Connor? A bit of overconfidence, perhaps?
I don't think so, and hopefully France will have learned from their history. Deschamps, I think, has been around the club long enough, been there as a player and perhaps on the wrong end of things as well. So I think this France team, even though they were a little bit disappointed with their Euros performance, I do think that they will be strong and will get out of the group.
All right. A couple of other general points.
Yeah, so one is, will France go with veterans or the shiny baubles that are their new players?
Well, they have a lot of shiny baubles for new players, and I don't really have an answer to this question. I suppose a lot of it comes down to whether these injuries are brought into the cup or not.
Yeah, and I think some of the veterans we mentioned, Benzema coming off a really good season, Giroud, playing an important part with AC Milan, Varane now kind of getting back into the Man United lineup. They have some veterans who are still performing at a high level. With France, you have so many players to choose from, and there's new players popping up all the time. I think it's a question for Deschamps to manage. Veterans playing well, but lots of new players kind of always banging on the door.
Yeah, well, some of those new players were definitely brought in as injury replacements, so it wouldn't shock me, despite their incredible club affiliations, it wouldn't shock me to see them kind of discarded if the veterans return, especially those that just popped up in September.
Yeah. And then our final point is how will the many injuries be navigated?
We will follow up with an injury report, and when they're due back, But it does seem certain that at least a couple of the definite and likely candidates that we talked about in the player-by-player section will be out for the Cup, and we'll come back to that. Okay, well, let's take a look at club affiliations. We've kind of talked about it through the player-by-player podcast, but any general comments other than wow, Connor?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be up there with the best in the world. And interesting, I think, and probably a strength of France is they're not just all from one country. They have top players in England, Germany, France, Italy, Spain. So they're well spread out, and I think that diversity probably helps them. But yeah, kind of if there's a big club, they probably have a French player on it.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, it looks like a description of, say, the top 8 of the Champions League club. I mean, there are a couple of smaller clubs, if you want to call them that, like West Ham, Aston Villa, Reims, maybe not the top tier teams, but second tier teams. But even those are few and far between amongst, Real Madrid and Chelsea, Juventus and Bayern Munich.
Yeah.
To say nothing of Paris Saint-Germain, where they play for the top clubs in France as well. So again, my concluding summary there is wow. Okay, well, we've put together a couple of statistics on the squad itself. So it's kind of interesting that to consider how many players are kind of on the slate overall, and how many are kind of under serious consideration, and how many we have in the definite and likely category tells us something about the team. And Connor, we have how many on the slate overall?
Yeah, 57 in terms of players that have been called up since 2020.
Okay, well, that compares to an average of 51. So again, maybe because they brought in a lot of players to cover those injuries, it's a bit higher than normal. But they can only bring 26 to the Cup, so that means basically 31 of the players we've talked about here will have to go.
Yeah.
But we look at players under consideration kind of as the ones we had in the definite, likely, or possible category. How many of those are there?
We have 36, so I'd also imagine that's probably a slightly higher than average number.
Yeah, not as much as the total number of candidates, but it is quite high. So again, not dead sure what that stat means, except perhaps a headache for the coach who has to cut 10 of them.
Yeah, 10 at least, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it may be made a bit easier. I think, as we said, a couple of the definite and likely ones may be cut because of injury. But wow, they have so many players to choose from. It's got to be a tough task for them to reduce it to 26.
Yeah.
Their average of definite and likely is actually kind of in range. So it's really just kind of the likely players or the players more on the outside. But that means, Connor, just room beyond these definite and likely players for just four of the possible players that we've talked about.
Yeah, 22 in that category. I mean, there may be some surprises, I suppose, but I think when they're healthy, which is obviously the big question mark right now, I think then they kind of know who their best players are. But there's a lot of experimentation, and we may get some surprises out of that.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think the injuries will end up throwing up a couple of surprises too. We've been looking at the average age of squads, and generally teams are between 25 and 27 years old. 26.7 is on the higher end.
Yeah, brought up by a few veterans, I would think.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that now, and they have a couple. Well, Steve Mandanda we had as possible, but he seems to be kind of going off the team. He's 37. Lloris is 35, and Giroud 35. Benzema 34, and in all they have about 8 players who are older than 30. Any comments on that? Do you think that's a negative?
I don't think in France's case, because a lot of those players that are over 30 are still playing at a high level for very big clubs. So in some cases, it might be a lack of renewal, but we know France has young players they can choose from. I just think they have veterans performing well. So I think that's good, and I think it's good to have some hangover from the last World Cup when they won it, because that experience should prove helpful.
Yeah, and as you say, they certainly have enough young players to replace them. They have 7 players who are 23 alone, or that may be 8, and then 5 players who are younger than 23. So most of those tend to be in the possible category, but they're certainly promising players.
Yeah.
Kylian Mbappe probably chief among them with 20. He's just 23 years old. I guess hand in hand with that is the number of caps, 32.5 on average, which is again slightly higher than most teams. The average I have among teams is 27. So again, kind of going along with that veteran. Any comments on that?
No, I think a lot of the points we covered in the age. They do have some veterans with some higher age, but a lot of caps, and that could prove useful.
Yeah. Do you see France as a particularly high-scoring team?
I do. Yeah, I think it's probably one of their strengths. I mean, they're strong all over the field, but we're talking about some of the attacking players who aren't starting or even on the fringe of the squad who would start for a lot of other countries. But yeah. A front 4, I guess. I only have room for 3 of Giroud, Benzema, Griezmann, and Mbappe that's goals wherever you look.
Yeah, that's right. Well, among my stats here, they are actually have the most goals. The average is 118, and they have 191.
Wow.
And sorry, I haven't been filling in the graphic on the YouTube here, so I'll just do that. But that works out to 5.5 goals per player, whatever that stat is worth, but that too is way higher than most other teams. It's Argentina who comes in next at 5.3, so teams well known for scoring. Just to give you a couple of percentages here, I'd say anything above 40 for a forward, 40% is a really good stat. And just looking at their top players here, we have Olivier Giroud with 43%. That is amazing over his long career. Antoine Griezmann and Karim Benzema both at 38%, and Kylian Mbappe at 47%. So just as you said, whoever they choose among those forwards, they're quite well known for scoring.
Yeah, that's amazing goal ratios among so many of their players.
Yeah. Perhaps a bit of a concern, though, is where they're getting goals among the other players, because the highest stat I see, there's really no one above 17%, except for Camavinga, surprisingly, who has 4 goals in 19 games, so maybe not enough games to really consider it a valid stat. But are you surprised by that, Connor? Kind of a low percentage among those non-forwards?
A little bit surprised, especially given some of the names. But I guess when you've got forward scoring at the ratio that they have, it's a little bit less important to be getting goals from elsewhere.
Yeah, well, certainly you're right. There's no concern with them not being able to score goals. Unlike Australia, who is in this group, who we're going to see do have a bit of a concern there. But let's move on to player issues to watch. Do you want to tell us maybe about some of the issues in defense?
So I guess starting at the goalkeeper position is Lloris's starting position under challenge, do you think?
What do you think?
I think probably not. He's still playing well for Tottenham. He's renowned as one of the best in the world, and he's captain. So he hasn't been in the last couple games, but I think he's their starter, and I don't think there's really any threat to that.
Yeah, in the player-by-player, we pointed out that he started only 2 of the 6 recent Nations League game, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of issue there. And so perhaps just giving those backup keepers a bit of field time. That's what I would guess.
Yeah.
This is a next one's a real issue, though. What's that?
Yeah, too many central defenders.
Yeah, that comes down to the number of injuries they had, but it was really stable actually in the Cup and in the first part of World Cup qualifying with Kimpembe and Varane. But then they started introducing all sorts of players. And as I said in the player-by-player, those 2 September games featured 3-man backlines in both cases. The only player who played both games was a player introduced in September. Sorry, I'm just looking for the name here.
That was Daddy Ashili, I think.
Yeah, right. So he was introduced new, and then the other 4 were all different players. So things seem very uncertain at the back, and I don't think we can just put that down to injuries.
No, I agree. I think injuries have been a part of it, but I think they're trying to find the right formula. They didn't have a great Nations League campaign, conceded more goals than they would have liked. So I think it's a little bit of trying to get the right balance.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a snake eating its own tail there, because did they perform poorly in Nations League because of the mixing and matching, or which one caused the other? Do you have an opinion?
I think if France can get back to their first choice, and I think both Varane and Kimpembe are part of that, that should add some stability. So, I think if they can call on the combinations they want, then that should lead to some improved performances. That's my feeling.
Yeah, well, that actually leads nicely into the third concern we have, or the third issue in defense.
Yeah, and that is, will veterans Dean and Pavard hold on to their positions?
All right, well, you talked about returning to the stability of Kimpembe and Varane in central defense. There are definite challenges to Digne as the right back and Pavard as the left back. Do you see it as wiser to going back to those veterans, Connor?
Possibly. I think it's a position where we're playing in a left wing back. It requires a lot of energy up and down. So it's kind of who can fill that role, especially if they do go with 3 at the back. So I think France has good cover in those positions. I don't think it's it's as big a concern. I don't think probably has a big of an impact on their defensive shape, who they put in there. So we may even see them rotate in the Cup potentially.
Yeah, good point. And about 2/3 of the time we saw that it has been a left wing back played by a left back. And that seems to be the preferred formation. Okay, let's move on to the midfield.
All right, so the first issue that we've identified is too many central midfielders.
Yeah, very much similar to the central defenders. Again, injury playing a role, but the same story. A lot of experimentation towards the end in those Nations League games, and did that lead to the poor performance? How much of a role was injuries in all of that?
Yeah.
So we won't repeat all that here. But then one other issue.
Yeah, and that's whether N'Golo Kanté is losing ground.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if he's fully fit that they will want to use him, but that's a big question. He's had a lot of injury concerns. Do you think he'll be the starter?
I think what you said is correct. I think if he's fit, he will start. I think he's been an indispensable part of France in the past, but he is 30 now, and has been in and out of the squad, so that may open the door for replacement or someone new. I still think at this tournament, though, he would be first choice if fit.
Yeah, well, fitness is very important. I mean, he's famous kind of for being all over the field, and maybe, when a player like that hits their 30s, they don't have the energy to do it. And if fitness and injury is a concern, I wouldn't be surprised if he is losing ground. In the attack, we kind of have the same issue with...
That's is Giroud making a comeback?
Yeah, I guess that's not the same issue as Conte, but a veteran player who never seems to age to the point of being off the team. But do you see him as a starter?
I guess it does depend a bit on Benzema's injury. He started the last two, but Benzema wasn't there. I think Giroud is probably happy to accept any role. Obviously, I'm sure would like to be starting, but if he comes off as a sub, he's a heck of a good sub to be bringing on. If France need a goal, he's someone who's kind of, for club and country, always seems to come up with big goals.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we'll see when the cup comes around. But we have quite a bit of business here to do with new players and especially injuries, and not so much with notable absences. But we went through the bios of all these new players in the player by player. So we'll just kind of point them out by name here. Do you want to take us through that?
Sure. So in new players for goalkeepers, we have Alphonse Areola and Mike Maignan.
Right. We consider those two definite candidates, except Maignan is a bit of an injury risk, which we'll get to soon.
Yeah. In center defense, there's several. In definite, we have Jules Koundé and William Saliba. And then in possible. Yeah. We have Deo Upamecano, Benoit Badiashile, and Ibrahim Konate. Those are the center backs.
Right, and Jules Koundé and Ibrahim Konate are injury risks among those. And just a note, Jules Koundé often plays on the right as a right back rather than as a central defender, but does do both.
Yeah. Then we have Theo Hernandez, who's a likely candidate, and Ferland Mendy, who's possible. They're both newcomers in left defense. And then we have
Theo Hernandez, a bit of an injury concern there.
Yeah, sorry. And then in right defense, we have Jonathan Klaus, who we consider likely.
Yeah, likely. And all right, yeah, moving on to the midfield.
Yeah, we have a definite in newcomer Aurélien Tchouameni. He's a defensive midfielder. And then we also have Matteo Guendouzi as a central midfielder, a newcomer, but we consider him likely. And then as a secondary striker, we have Christopher Nkunku, the Leipzig player.
Right. So surprising, really, how many of those young players have made inroads into the squad.
Yeah, it is. Some opportunities. The position probably where they struggle the most with injuries, which is notably center defense, where I see the most newcomers. But yeah, it's a lot of names who will be pushing for the squad, or some that we think will be there already.
Right. Okay, well, injuries, maybe if you tell us who it is, and I can give an update or the latest on where their injury seems to stand.
Yeah, so first we have goalkeeper Mike Maignan.
Right, and again, he was a definite candidate. However, he's got a calf injury, but he is expected back on October 20th, as we said in the player-by-player, so not too much danger there.
Yeah, in center defense, we have Jules Koundé.
Yeah, and a definite candidate who plays on the right, perhaps even a little bit more than in central defense. He has an Achilles tendon problem, but he's expected to be back in time for the Cup. The return date is predicted as October 15th.
Yeah, then we have Lucas Hernandez in the same position.
Yeah, Lucas Hernandez was a left back for a long time, but is coded as a central defender, and usually in the three-man defense. We have him as likely, but he has a torn muscle bundle with no return date. I kind of feel like no return date is not good news, Connor.
Yeah, I agree, especially with the tournament just kind of 2 months away.
Okay, I'm going to highlight him in red if there seems to be a serious risk of them not returning. And we'll be updating this in the November podcast, or in the November media cast. So keep your eye out for that one. Pernell Kimpembe. Oh, you're introducing them. Sorry.
That's all right. I'll just repeat it then. Pernell Kimpembe, he's also an injury risk.
Right, we have him as a likely candidate, the central defender, and had a hamstring injury, which is usually kind of a long-term thing, but he is expected back October 24th.
Yeah. And then we have Ibrahima Konate, also in central defense.
Yeah, he was on the injury list, but the last time I checked, he wasn't. So he was out for the last 2 games. I can't remember. Oh, it was with a knee injury, but it's not on the injury list anymore. So perhaps we'll take him off the list here.
Yeah, on to the left defense, we have Luca Dean.
And do you know anything from your personal knowledge there? He has an ankle injury with no return date.
No, I don't have any additional information on his injury.
Okay, well, we have him as a definite candidate, but of course, only if he's fit. So a bit injury prone. Do you think Luca Dean?
Tough to say. He may be. I'm not sure. He might need some more game time too, which would be a question. He hasn't played much for Villa this season.
Yeah, he's kind of been out with injury a few times. Okay, who's next?
Next, we have Theo Hernandez.
Okay, Theo Hernandez. We again a likely candidate here, but I'm going to put Luca Dean in red there because that seems one of the more troublesome ones. Theo Hernandez would be his replacement, but he was injured for the last 2 matches, and he too has no return date on a muscle tear. So a bit of a desperate situation on the left back position there, Connor.
Yeah, a little bit for sure. Though it does open a door to Ferland Mendy in that position.
Yeah, right. And he played the last 2 games in September, so that could be a blessing for his career. God, that is 5 defenders. Are we done with defenders?
We are, but we'll move on to midfield, and we have some more injuries here, starting with Boubacar Kamara.
All right, well, he's out with a knee injury. We only have him as a possible candidate in the first place. He's expected back November 22nd, and not to put you on the spot here, but do you know when the first game or when the World Cup begins?
It's right around that time. It's kind of right around November 20th. So if he's just getting back and he's only a possible candidate, it might spell the end for him.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Adrian Rabiot. I'm stealing your lines again.
That's all right. Just as well, he's no longer listed as injured. So.
Okay, well, we won't even put him on the list. He was out with a calf injury for those September games, but fortunately, because he's a definite candidate, if he's no longer on the injury list. So let's move on.
Yeah, next we have Kingsley Coman.
We consider the right midfielder a likely candidate, and he doesn't have a return date with a hamstring injury. Oof, doesn't look good, Connor.
No, not so good for him.
Yeah. Okay, and are we done with midfielders? I think we are.
Yeah, just 2 forwards to mention as the list grows, beginning with Karim Benzema.
All right, well, Karim Benzema was on the injury list. He's had actually a couple of injuries in the period that we examined, but no longer on the injury list. So maybe that means Giroud will go back to being a substitute. But Giroud did kind of replace him in those September games.
Yeah, and then finally we have Anthony Martial.
Okay, I'm going to take Karim Benzema off because he's not on the most recent list I saw. But Anthony Martial, also with no return date, but the diagnosis there is an Achilles irritation, which doesn't sound that serious, but sometimes niggles can be. What do you think?
It might just be uncertain too. Maybe they can't put a date on it. Again, he's someone that, kind of on the fringe of the squad. So probably doesn't help his cause. He probably need to be making a push to play regularly and very well to try and squeeze in. But the Achilles irritation will probably hinder that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think he'd have to have a good spell with Manchester United over the next few games to get in, and that doesn't really look likely. Okay, well, let's take a look at a few absences, and actually, we're going to kind of go back to the 2018 World Cup here, since some of our audience will basically follow teams from World Cup to World Cup. Do you want to take us through that, Connor?
Yeah, some of the names we mentioned, and we gave their bios, so we'll just mention it by name. But we have Steve Mandanda, the goalkeeper.
Yeah, we still have him as a possible candidate, but quite a few players ahead of him, and he's getting old, even for a goalkeeper.
Yeah. Next, we have Kurt Zuma.
Yeah, we said Kurt Zuma missed the last 8 matches, so seems to be off the squad. But we do have him as possible, but unlikely.
Yeah, and then we have Samuel Umtiti.
Yeah, we said during the player-by-player that he kind of came in quickly and went out quickly, so had a good Euro 16 and 2018 World Cup, but hasn't played since September 2019.
Yeah, and then one other player we'll mention is Blaise Matuidi.
I mean, if I was following World Cup to World Cup, I'd kind of wonder where he was. He was a sub in the 2018 World Cup, but then gained a starting position, and he's a familiar name to me, but he wasn't even around for the Euro 2020.
Yeah, he's actually 35 years old and was with Inter Miami most recently. He has 84 caps for France, but yeah, none recently, so we have him as an absence.
Yeah, so all in all, that's not bad, Connor. They still have most of their big names still around.
Yeah, a lot of veterans nearing retirement, but not there yet.
Okay, well, let's finish by looking at who we think is going to be the starters. And basically, we won't try to define the substitutes, but anyone who's in the definite or likely category that we don't identify as a starter is probably going to be a substitute, because we have them as definite or likely to make the squad at least. So what do you think for goalkeepers, Connor?
Well, for goalkeepers, I think it has to be Hugo Lloris as the starter.
Yeah, I agree. I think Mike Maignan will be second if he's fit, and we should actually put Didier Deschamps as the manager as starter. We have 2 definite candidates, so they will probably be the backups. Do you see any central defenders as starters?
I mean, I think if they were healthy, there's a few I could put down and kind of look at also who played recently in major tournaments for them, is giving some indication. Mm-hmm. They've used that 3-4-1-2 formation, probably being their most common formation. So possibly there's 3 to pick from. I would say that Raphael Varane and Presnel Kimpembe are probably the 2 most likely, and then would probably add Jules Koundé in as a third. But how do you see it?
Yeah, no, I agree with you in principle. I wouldn't be confident enough to say Kimpembe and Varane. They were the kind of the starting 2 for the Euro Cup and in the first half of the games we examined, but they've been kind of off the team. So I'm just not confident enough to put them as starters. But I do think you named the top 3 candidates there.
Yeah, they're not the ones who played most recently, so that, like you said, that does add some variety. I'm probably not 100% confident on anyone, just given what the situation's been.
Yeah, me too. In terms of starters, I think we've got probably 5 players there who will reach the final squad, but it'll kind of maybe come down to injuries or form, or I'm not really confident enough to nominate any of them.
Yeah.
How about left back?
I think there's a couple injury concerns to Digne and Hernandez. So I think Ferland Mendy, who played the 2 games in September, is probably the most likely to start at this point.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I'm not quite ready to highlight his name in green, but I think he could slide in ahead of the other 2 because of their injuries. Do you want to highlight any of those?
Tough to say, because it depends who's going to be fit. So yeah, maybe it's best not to kind of stake a claim on anyone's name at this point.
Yeah, I agree with you. How about on the right side?
I do see Benjamin Pavard as probably the most likely candidate. just partly because of the inexperience of some of the players behind him. So I would say Pavard would likely be starting at right back.
I'll go along with that. I actually think Koundé is kind of the backup in that position, and Pavard hasn't been playing as much recently, but he's one of the ones I'd be more comfortable with highlighting.
Yeah.
Defensive or central midfielders, usually the back two, or usually the back two.
Well, we mentioned it when we talked about midfielders, is that Conte and Pogba are probably the two most likely to start, even though they haven't been involved kind of consistently over the last several months. But what do you see? Do you see those two as starting, or do you see any newcomers kind of taking a spot?
We have Rabiot as a definite candidate, but he can play all over the field. So he might not be a central midfielder, but maybe on the right or even a bit more attacking. I agree with you about Conte and Pogba, but I'm just not confident enough that they just haven't started enough games recently enough for me to think that they're going to be a starter in the Cup.
Yeah, we should mention that Tchouaméni started the 2 games in September. So that could be some indication if it is going to be someone else.
Yeah, that's right. He's the actually, among the candidates that we have here, I would say Tchouaméni seems to be the most likely starter now. Are you confident enough about that to highlight it?
Probably not him yet, just because I'm not sure about Pogba and Conte. But if you feel confident, then go for it.
No, I kind of agree with you. I think it depends on injury concerns and stuff like that. So we're not doing well here in nominating the starting squad. Any left midfielders?
I think given that we've seen they often play fullbacks in the left kind of winger position, I don't see any of the names we have as likely starters. They just haven't played enough regularly.
Yeah, me neither. We only have Ousmane Dembele as a possible candidate to reach the squad, so I wouldn't be nominating him as a starter. How about Kingsley Coman on the right midfield?
Yeah, we mentioned his big injury concern. So yeah, probably unlikely. To make the squad. So yeah, I don't see a starting position. But injuries again rear their ugly head.
Yeah, left wingers, and that's, as you said, usually played by the left and right back, and we weren't sure about those either. So we're really not doing well here. Right wingers, they don't even have any players nominated as a right winger. So we probably won't choose any of those. But I think we can do a bit better with the forward line.
Yeah, I think Mbappe and Griezmann are nailed on starters, and I would give Benzema the edge over Giroud if he's fit.
Yeah, given that he's not on the injury list, I'm actually ready to highlight him in green. Do you have any major objections to that?
Nope, not with Benzema.
Okay, well, a lot left up in the air. They certainly have a lot of great players to choose from, but none of them have really been playing regularly enough for us to nominate a lot of starters, except in the forward line, where we're quite confident about with starters. But it'll be interesting to see. Maybe we'll have a bit firmer opinion in the update podcast.
Yeah, hopefully.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of this podcast. That update podcast will be coming out probably in mid-November once the final rosters are published, and we'll talk about any developments on the team, especially with injuries when it comes to France.
Yeah, and meanwhile, keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end, and our website, soccerphiles.captivate.fm. And check the show notes for links to our website and previous podcast series.
All right, thanks for listening, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.